Welcome, my friends. Guilherme from Brazil, Joachim from Holland. We all join here today to discuss Aristotle's invention of scientific philosophy. How about that? Well, the term scientific philosophy does not appear in Aristotle, but he is, of course, the hero of modern scientific philosophy, and he's seen as sort of the forefather or the founding father of a scientific approach to philosophy. Well, why not Socrates? Why was it? Well, because Aristotle formulates ideas in a systematic way, in a scientific way, and he sets the stage for modern science. And so, for the modern distinction between science and, well, non-science, or myth, or poetry, or something that is not really scientifically rigorous. Of course, science, scientia, which means knowledge, really, whatever that means, on the other hand, is usually episteme in Greek. So it pertains to what is eternal, whereas for us, well, moderns, it does not quite pertain to what is eternal. All you need to do is ask Mr. Fauci, who says that he represents science. Now, in what way would Aristotle represent scientific philosophy? Why would he venture into this project? If he does at all, or how do we understand that project? In recent days, I've posted a recording, a discourse on this subject that touches upon it, showing or indicating at any rate that Aristotle is defending the philosophical life. And this defense has to, which is in writing, has to be of a certain type. Right? He is not, however, abandoning the philosophical life. He is simply defending it. And later we will see in the Middle Ages a defense of Aristotle's defense. And after the Middle Ages, or against the grain of the Middle Ages, we will find something else, categorically incompatible. So we will find a new science that destroys the defense of Aristotle and that reinterprets Aristotle effectively to subvert the classical philosophical life as lived and represented by the likes of Socrates and our divine Plato. So that is a general preliminary vision here that we have that has been proposed. Let us try to discuss this. Let us try to explore this vision, this suggestion, these intimations. Guilherme, you have disappeared. You have fallen into the dark. We see your name, but we do not see you. And this is tied to the topic, because with the moderns we tend to have the words, but not the things themselves. All right, we just had a glitch, but we're back on track. And as I was pointing out, Guilherme, we have this situation in the modern world where we have a peculiar disjuncture between words and things. So we have scientific certainty that is guaranteed through alienation of speech from existence. So we live in a symbolic universe where we can be extremely exact. We seek exactitude in our speech. That's what science comes to be through an extrapolation of, we could say, an abstraction of language from experience. Then we bring language back to experience, trying to overcome that gap, that alienation. And this is the scientific method, of course. We have language that becomes a method, then goes back on experience and secures now our life as in a scientific world. All of a sudden, we have a world that is scientific because it is formatted complements of the new method, of the new symbolic language. This is not, however, as I suggested, what Aristotle is up to. If he is defending the philosophical life, he is not understanding his, for example, his metaphysical formulations as, shall we say, a doctrine that then should be used to, as kind of a grid, yeah, to interpret our experience, to understand our experience. And it's very difficult for us moderns, we're raised as moderns in a modern world, in going to modern schools, to to step out of a modern indoctrination, modern prejudices, modern assumptions. We are, as I pointed out recently, we're not born Machiavellian, we're not born moderns, but we are raised as moderns, and it takes a huge effort for us not to be moderns, not to take things for granted, not to assume that we understand the ancients and that, look, they're really like us. You know, he's a scientist, just as we are scientists, just less developed, less sophisticated. All right. Uh, Joachim, Guilherme, any of you two has questions, objections, arrows, tomatoes, anything?
Yeah,
No
you can
tomatoes,
go
no
first.
tomatoes. Guillermo, you have something?
You can go first, Joachim. I would only say that.
Oh, of course. Well, considering the alienation that you speak of, if I can call it nominalism that we have in the today's science formal least, it's curious to look at how Aristotle is spoken about insofar as he's spoken about well today, because I've heard him referred to as painted as empiricist, as opposed to Plato, who is rationalist. Perhaps that's how they would word it. So for Aristotle, the form is in the thing. For Plato, the form is outside of the thing. This is how it's often spoken about. And so Aristotle would be a sort of a proto-scientist because he goes towards the thing. He writes about biology. He looks at animals. He looks at the particulars. And then he, I don't know, formulates universals. This is somewhere along these lines it's spoken about. Well, of course, if you look at this matter of knowledge, right? What is this knowledge that we're speaking about? If you look at the way Aristotle talks about it, it's really rather different from any sort of formal scientific method. Anything is how this is explicated in Kant. This problem, for instance, or anyone after or before, in terms of moderns, and so. There's really two ways I see people go about that. The one is that, well, this more speculative metaphysical side is something that is, just that it's particular to him. But the more concrete empiricism is taken in the current of history. It's superseded eventually by the method and its tools. The other way in which you can hear some try to maintain the continuity between Aristotle and modern science is to say that modern science is thought thinking itself. This is how thought thinks itself, by inspecting the particulars rigorously and exactly and coming to know them fully. Something like that. and then you know how beautiful they are, how what they're good for, because you know how they work, basically. And so this knowledge is it's expanding and it's coming to its fullness. And or perhaps it's asymptotic. You just keep talking, right? You keep publishing, you keep talking, and it's beautiful, it's wonderful, lucrative. Even you don't say that part, but it's
Why
beautiful.
not?
Yeah, well, give them a break.
All right.
It
Well,
does take time
so
after all.
there you're suggesting that um, that in fact the mind of God is replaced by Cartesian sense of certainty. I mean, the ego's the res cogitans, yes, this I think, this I that thinks.
Well, it's from the beginning. It's a little. It's not how would you say it in English? There's a tension. You have the ego on the one hand, and then you have Spinoza on the other hand to say the content of the mind of God is formula XYZ, right? And these would be natural laws, perhaps. This is how it's spoken about. So we are discovering the mind of God. It's these formulas that are absolute. They're um, perennial, enduring, and they shape the way in which the particulars emerge and behave and pass, and so on.
All right, but
There's
it's not.
that
It's
also,
yes,
but
but it's
then
yes.
that's wound up with the ego that is having to establish all of this, formulate all of this, posit all of this,
Mhm.
and do it, of course. So you have both, right?
Yes, yes.
And
Keeping in mind that Joachim, that it is not difficult to have an adequate understanding of the mind of God for Spinoza.
right,
It's quick. It's
it's
quick.
yes, it's formula XYZ.
And then we move on. We have an adequate understanding of the essence of the mind of God. So there it is, the geometrical God. We have we settled that matter. Now we can move on to appreciate the existential aspect of God. The way what do we do with this God in vitro? Is
Mm,
just there. We just settled the matter at the beginning of the discussion. Now the rest of the discussion is dedicated to seeing what can happen to this God, how he
yeah.
unfolds existentially. So ultimately, the highest knowledge is the knowledge of existence.
Hmm.
And as we we can point out here, this is why precisely why Spinoza refers to Machiavelli as sapiens on more than one occasion. For on Spinoza's well, in his book, as it were, Spinoza is wise insofar as he has a grasp of existence. Now, you can call that fortuna, all right? So it's the existential, shall we say, movement of being. He has an understanding of becoming, not just of being, which we have settled. Being is there. And we could think here of, for instance, of uh, Spinoza's student, had it removed, but Hegel, right? So for Hegel, of course, the ancients had the universals. There you have it. Aristotle had the universals. He had all the formulas, but they're empty. They're empty as nominalism's names. Now we have to fill them up, or rather, they fill up in the course of the unfolding of history. And so now we can appreciate the content, which is really what counts, the the becoming of being. And it is through the becoming that being acquires its true life, its truth. The truth of being emerges through the becoming of being. And we can appreciate that. We moderns, the ancients, know. Hegel is clear about this. The ancients just had sort of a vision of, names. That's good. That's good. Good. For them, it's good. But we have to, well, appreciate more than just names, right? We have to appreciate that being is truly itself as it becomes historically. Now,
Actuality, as it's come to be called, which is, so for actuality, as
oh,
people,
yes.
so knowledge of existence, as we called it just now, that's come to be called actuality. Of course, actuality before meant something else, but now this actuality would be the features of existence.
Well, in an
Features
absolute
of
sense, yes, in an absolute sense for as we're brought up and for moderns, possibility, not even potentiality, because potentiality involves already implicitly, it evokes an actuality. Potential for what? Potential for some. No, we don't know. We cannot say. But possibility precedes absolutely actuality. This is freedom, modern freedom, right? We have the power, so we go back not so much to the actualities of the ancients, which were just nominal, but to the power that will enable us to bring about an actuality that is way beyond ancient expectations.
which will in itself constitute a sure knowledge.
All right, uh, Guilherme.
I agree with the general diagnosis, the analysis you made, specifically of the rupture that modern science represents. Although I would like to meditate a little bit upon the specific analysis of Aristotle as a representative part of this scientific philosophy. I actually see more of a continuity between him and Plato than a rupture. And to analyze that, but I believe that Aristotle isn't that figure of discontinuity between the pre-scientific philosophy tradition. And I say this having in mind the work by the German-born French philosopher Eric Weil. And Weil, analyzing the topics of Aristotle, he makes the question: if Aristotle is held as like the forefather of modern rationalism, and as a logic philosopher who argues by formal syllogisms such as Euclid in his Elements, why does he actually uses this method in such a few way in his own work? For an example, at the first book of Metaphysics, he doesn't do a sequence of formal syllogisms. He actually gets the opinions of the philosophers who preceded him, like Thales and the pre-Socratics and the Pythagoreans and Plato. And what he does is a dialectical argument from the methodology he actually formulates in his topics. It's not the methodology he formulates in his analytics books, like the mathematical geometric method we see in Spinoza. It's actually a dialectic approach. And that's the point that Eric Weil emphasizes on Aristotle. He's more of a dialectic philosopher than an analytic philosopher. And I believe the real rupture, as both you and Joachim said, starts with nominalism because of the emphasis nominalism employs on the will. As we know, nominalism holds that the relation between cause and effect isn't an intelligible one. We can only hold it from the relation of the will of God. God wills that things happens in that way, and then we can know that we can have objective knowledge of reality. And I think that emphasis on the will is something that is deeply ingrained in the modern view of science, science as will. And we can see it in Descartes when Descartes says that the intellect is formally limited, but will is formally infinite. And we can see that in Kant when he holds that the limits of the intellect and of rational knowledge we can find it both on the a priori categories of sensibility and of understanding, but by will we can keep in touch with the absolute. So I believe we can find all of these origins of modern scientific philosophy not in Aristotle but in Machiavelli. As the Brazilian philosopher Olavo de Carvalho would say, Machiavelli was a condottiero of the will. He was a philosopher of the condottieri. And I believe this spirit was transmitted by Machiavelli to all of the philosophers who succeeded. Descartes was a condottiero of science, and Marx was a condottiero of politics. And I believe that's the real unit that constitutes modern scientific philosophy and ruptures with the classic pre-scientific philosophy. This emphasis on the will. And I think that would be my main point.
What is wrong with that? One might object today. What is wrong with the will? I mean, this emphasis on the will that we have today, and of course, if you look even in academic circles, especially Anglo-American academic circles, very often you read papers and you go to conferences where people begin their discussion with, I want to say, this is what I want to say today. I want to make the argument. Right? I want. Why? Because what else do we have as a standard, as a starting point? This is where we start from. I have to be frank, I have to be authentic about this. Speech starts from a decision of an individual, the decision of an individual. What is this individual? Some kind of Cartesian, symbolic, abstract, mathematical entity, the ego. Okay, but what's wrong with this? And of course, this is tied to the problem of freedom. Now, freedom is autonomous. I am free. You have these scholars today. I find them quite intriguing, pathetically intriguing. They say, look, is there freedom of the will? Metaphysically, no. There is no such thing. You're not free. But pragmatically, yes, because by affirming your freedom, you are free. In other words, all you need to do is proclaim freedom. You need to fight for freedom, and in fighting for freedom, you're free. This is the kind of freedom that we have. It's so to speak. It's an as if, to speak in Kantian terms. It's as if we were free. And the more we pretend to be free, and the more, you know what? It's going to turn into real freedom. And why? How? How do we know this? Because in pretending to be free, we'll establish a society in which everybody's pretending to be free, and the society is objective. The world that we're building is objective, even though our freedom is delusional. In this world, the delusional will become true and real. Isn't that fantastic? What else do we have after all? I mean, what are we going to go back to the medievals with their quibbles about words and what else is this not our destiny as a society, global society, as a species, to live in this world in which finally our delusion can be reality?
It's like the modern mentality is taking the quote like fake it till you make it and make it a dogma, you know? And we can find it in Marx. When we say that Marx is a materialist, I think we have to keep in mind that for Marx, matter is exactly something without a form. The actual form isn't found in nature, but in human action. So Marx was more of a idealist in the sense that for him, the matter that we find in nature isn't that real. It only becomes real. It only becomes reality when it's actualized by human action. So even when modern science says, and modern science in the modern Marxist vein says, no, we are materialistic, they are like actually the most idealist mode of thinking one can think of. The subjunction of reality to human action.
This was a point that was articulated at length and systematically um, by Leo Strauss, who pointed out that modern idealism is based on a materialist foundation, premise. So we have this, of course, this res extensa, and now what do we do with the state of nature and Hobbes? And now what do we do with this low ground? We have to perfect it through, of course, human action. And so we have, but here we have the ideals, the new concepts, the new transcendentals, and these will be the instruments, the new mathematical science or the language, the new symbols. And these symbols, all of our language will become an instrument to remold, repackage material. And what is material? Well, it is the past, we could say. So when we look at the past, we look at Aristotle, that too is material. And in academia, that's what we do all the time. We look at the past as material to reconstruct, to recreate, to bring back to life. In fact, to turn into the zombie, to recontextualize it. Where is it not that in academia we recontextualize? Everything is about recontextualizing. I was at a conference recently uh, on Oakshott, and they're saying, well, look, I mean, everybody's, this is what we do. We have to contextualize, repackage. So why? Why? Why?
I believe
Because,
it's sorry, you can say.
well, perhaps because we can use, if we don't recontextualize, if we don't repackage, then we can't use it. But again, why do you want to use Aristotle? Are we done with the business of trying to understand? Maybe because you can understand only by using and through using. And again, this goes back to the problem of becoming. Being becomes itself, is truly itself only when it becomes. And it can become only through man. So we're bringing about this whole new age business. And I hear left and right all over the place these discourses about, oh, there's the vulgar stuff that happens today, wars and so forth. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. And there's this new age coming about, and we're bringing it about through our struggle, through our sacrifices, collective efforts. This is precisely what the Nazi were saying in the 1930s. And here we are. Here we are. With the same story. Same story. So universities are involved in this business. Boy, but not only them, because it's trickle down effect. And so it goes into schools. It's you have to come up with your brilliant idea, right? You have to express yourself already in elementary school, first grade, or kindergarten. It's all about this affirmation of your will. And of course, all by yourself is not going to work. So you have to learn the methods. The school will empower you with these methods, these techniques, so we can all work together. And each one of us will affirm his will, and together we'll establish this great new world. Is that working?
Um, perhaps a few dozen eggs later. Haven't broken enough eggs.
We haven't broken enough eggs. Yeah,
It's a hell of an omelet.
how many eggs do we need to break? How
Um,
bad does it need to get before the drug addict says, "Oh no, I'm on the wrong path"?
well, mathematically, it's going to take about 75% of the eggs, but the figures differ. The figures differ in this. Um,
Population reduction, well, that's for the sake of the earth, of course.
yes, well, you have to leave the pan for the omelet.
The earth calls us to eliminate most of us, especially those who are not working hard towards the establishment of this kingdom of inns.
Oops, sorry.
We are the
Right.
carbon they want to reduce.
Yeah, stop breathing. That's you have your footprints, carbon footprints are too hefty. All right, so Aristotle, was he scientific, and to what extent? How should we read Aristotle, first of all? We have all these formulas. We have all of this this cathedral, right? This rigor, this how do we understand this? How do we approach this? Is it moving in the direction of uh, the, shall we say, the formalization of the philosophical life in a system of words also? Perhaps more importantly, and more to the point, what we have today related to this shift from the philosophical life to the formulas is a break between the how and the what. You could also say the essence and the existence, the genesis and, well, uh, that which we are talking about as such. And here we have a dilemma. Modern science cannot account for itself, for its genesis. It gives out formulas. Now we can believe them or not. We can play the Monopoly game, follow the rules. It's up to us. But the rules don't account for themselves. They don't explain the genesis. Of course, we have the doctrine of evolution that pretends to explain the genesis of modern science. Historicism in the 19th century was set up for that purpose, to explain, to justify modern rationalism, and so modern idealism, modern freedom, modern liberalism. Today we'd say modern democracies. Why do we have modern democracies? Well, they're the result of, say, our conservatives today, the result of history. We have had these developments of these values from the ancients, these values that which we have developed, we have enriched throughout our history, and we're here, and we should cherish our history. And that is what makes us what we are. That's why we're here. So we should cherish this history of ours because it helps us survive today. Oh my, oh my. Is that why? Because it helps us escape violent death? So,
And that's pretty much the Hegelian vision because it sees the actuality, both in the actuality in the sense of something actual, like in the present, in contraposition as against the past. Actuality is the same thing as actuality in the opposite of potentiality, in the sense that the present, the present ideology, the present institutions, they are the realization of these values of antiquity. And this vision is essentially Hegelian because it doesn't account for the dramas and the rupture, sorry, we have seen in the modern age. And I believe this is the most dangerous aspect of this modern conservative ideology, of seeing only a line of Hegelian development of ideas and institutions.
What alternatives do we have? Especially when it comes to this rupture between the how and the what. What about Christianity? Let us take the example of Christians. And Christians today tend to accept this split as moderns because modernity has nothing to do, their upbringing has nothing to do with Christianity in itself, with the Christian religion, with the Gospels. It is something that is brought in to help us read the Gospels, if anything. So, what do? They say, look, we believe in this, right? And then the question comes up, how? How is it that that it's there? How do you read it? How how do you account for the distance between you and the sources? How do you read it means how do you interpret it? Is it just there as a fact? And you say, you believe? I just recently had this exchange with this fellow who's telling me, oh, we believe this. We believe that these words are true. We believe that these words are true. What does that mean? We don't have to ask these academic questions, he says. Faith alone is enough, he says. He says the academic questions, how this came into being. No. We believe that these words are true. And we live accordingly, right? Our works are based on these words that we believe to be true. We could have a similar argument for the so-called scientists. We believe in the method to be true method, true scientific method, and our works are based on that method. That's ominously similar situation. Again, you pointed out, the question of the will. Yes, I mean, this turns out is, and Strauss himself was apt to point this out as well, that at the end of the day, science says, well, we want to have it this way. We want it. This is it's modern science is based on an act of the will or a choice. We choose to be free. We choose to live in a modern democracy. It's our choice. And then, worst comes to worst, we can justify that choice by saying, well, it's evolution, it's the historical development that has led us here, and so we're simply, reflecting, and our act of the will is reflecting the forces of nature. Perhaps even the greater power. The greater power. God becomes this greater power. It's amorphic. That empowers us to will, to affirm ourselves. So God now is there to help us assert our own will.
At the same time, the objectivity of these forces is swallowing up the individuality and the freedom that is being willed. Or at any rate, some eggs have to be broken, some not. Some of the time, some all of the time, some none of the time. Well, none of the.
Yes, yes. But maybe we are simply too small. We shouldn't be selfish. We shouldn't
in
be
the flux.
egoistic. It's just as with this the COVID circus, where don't be selfish, wear your mask. It,
Yes,
right? Because we have to work towards the establishment of this wonderful society in which we can all be equally vaccinated.
it will be selfish, die. But that's what I'm, that's what I'm staring at. These the story. There's some static there in that story of continuity. The forces of, well, history isn't really. It doesn't have any scientific credibility. Uh, no one really has spoke. Well, not no one, but very few have spoken meaningfully about it since Nietzsche and his Max Weber's reformulation of Nietzsche. It's a slightly more neat academic reformulation of Nietzsche.
Well, okay, but if history does not have its reason, as Hegel would insist it did, then what are we left with? Of course, Nietzsche exposes history as the absence of reason, you say,
Yeah,
as exploding reason. So now what do we have left with? Brute force. The brute forces are vouching for our science.
that's true. Thankfully, we already knew about those brute forces before the concept of history was really formalized in any rigorous way. So in that respect, modernity has a little loop built in there. So, oh yeah, remember that's final death, and that's why you have this whole new reason in its history. That's true.
This reminds me of Joseph Conrad's quote that even illogicity, madness, insanity has its own logic, its own inner workings. And when we analyze modernity, I always remember Olavo de Carvalho's formulation that the drama of the modern man is the inner fight, the inner struggle between Behemoth and Leviathan. Is the struggle between the absolute external forces and this inner will to change and to, in a Promethean way, to challenge these forces. And I believe as much illogical this experience is because it has no rational resolution and it ends up in suffering and drama, you can understand it as a continuous pattern in modernity. Is at the same time contradiction and continuity. So, as Conrad says, even contradiction, even illogicity, even unintelligibility has its own patterns of working, of inner working.
Shakespeare, William Shakespeare, in several of his plays, articulates this problem. Man's will, faced with the greater power, all right, so to speak, what does he do? Does he accept it passively or does he fight against it? And this is, I mean, you could say, okay, the voluntarist God, right, who is defined by will primarily, is pitted against my will. And so now, and this comes back in Christianity today, now we have man's will and then whatever the greater power says. So what do we do? If we assert our will, the greater will squash us. If we don't assert our will, it'll squash us anyway. It's a no-win situation. But at least you can pretend that you're free, say the moderns, and keep running over the void as these little, what is it, the woodpecker does in these old cartoons, they running over the cliff, and he keeps running and running, and then
Until he looks down.
no, but you're not supposed to look down.
Yeah, that's right.
As soon as you look down, you realize that the Ponzi scheme is bankrupt. So you're not supposed to ask metaphysical questions. We don't need to, say the pragmatists. You don't need to ask. It's irrelevant. Don't ask these questions.
It's
So then
politically
you'll be
incorrect.
fine. Then everything will be fine. If you don't think, just do it. Everything will be fine. And, what else can we do? Why bother thinking? Why bother raising these questions when we can make enough money today to buy our car and to feed our bellies? Why bother with questions of the soul? Why? What's wrong with the Faustian game? What else do we have today? Is this what we're teaching our children? Right? Just believe in the words, say the Christians. Just believe that they're true. Okay? And what about this act of belief? What's it grounded in? An act of the will? Is it that? I will to believe that those words are true? True. And how do you read those words? Well, the words are there to empower me, right? So we can do good. How Machiavellian. What do you mean by good? Well, establish the new world, right? Do God's will, right? God's will is there for us to bring it about in our world. Isn't this fair? And isn't this what Christianity is all about? God needs us, and we need Him in a different way. This is what Christianity is?
We would call this an NGO, charity.
Yeah, yeah. A charity for profit.
This reminds me of Eric Wegelin's conception of the immanentization of the scaton. The kingdom of heaven is today, but not today in the sense that Christ says to the good thief. It's today in the sense that it's something we today can do, we today can found, we today can make it real.
All right. All right. Well, what about Aristotle? Can Aristotle still help us? Can the ancients still help us? Can they guide us? Or can they just be used? Or all we're left with doing is using, abusing, recycling, contextualizing, putting to use in the sense of realizing them in our own works, in the fruit of our own labor.
We
Oh,
need teachers.
well,
Yes.
well, the teachers are, where are you going to find them? In academia, we hire only those who are working for the
I don't mean those people.
monopoly, for the monopoly game. So it is tricky. It is very tricky. Small communities are destroyed in the name of virtual communities. Virtual communities are much freer. Everybody can, they're all inclusive. Whereas small communities, oh, they're narrow, they're closed. But the new virtual community, virtual. Now, if you were to say instead of virtual, fake, that wouldn't sound very good, would it?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's a little dual edged. Maybe the one is a little sharper than the other. On the one hand, you can say, well, the fake platform is what allows us to speak,
Yes?
and there's a good chance that for most, perhaps all watching this video, or who have any chance of watching it,
Right.
or who might watch it, is their only chance of hearing a sensible word on this topic in their entire lives. On the other hand, the reason why that is because of those virtual impulses to begin with. So,
Hence the question, Joachim. What is it that connects us? And the temptation, this is what we're raised to believe, is that all of this technology is connecting us. Now, what would an Aristotelian or a classic respond to that? Is technology the medium? Or, well, in classical Platonic terms, what connects us is not technology, but thought. Now, thought makes its ways through this technique and through this technology, shall we say. So in this case, it would not be so much the technology that allows us to communicate, but the thought that cuts through technology as light in the dark and that is refracted, is finding ears to hear, cultivating ears to hear. If we do not raise this objection to the machine, then we're left with nominalism. Everything that we're saying here is just words in the machine. And so it doesn't matter. The only reason the machine allows us to speak thus is that the game is set up so that you can say anything because nothing matters as long as it feeds into the machine. It doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter to the ears that hear because in modern, a nominalist world, everything is Disneyland. You can go to Paris, you can go everywhere, you to Tokyo. It's right around the corner. You can pretend to say something, whereas in fact you're not saying anything. The how. Someone once said it's not so much the gods they pray to, but the way they pray to the gods. Well, we have that way, the how, and then the what. These two have an original bond. You can't separate them. Shakespeare speaks of a ring. There's the ring, the how, the love, and the beloved, the object of love. The lover or the love, the desire, and the object. And these two, once you split them, you try to put them back together, it's not going to work. Guilherme, thoughts on this before the machine closes the scene, right? The rideau, right?
the curtains.
Right, the curtains on us, and that's it. And we are cast into obscurity, waiting for the toilet to flush and more garbage to accumulate over these words, and everything is going to be mixed up in this cosmological chaos, to speak in oxymoron terms. Right?
I think I could have put in better words. Sorry, Joaquin. I think I could.
Oh no, it's I said a feline vortex.
Yes, Guilherme, please.
Well, I actually have no objections, no other thoughts. I think you put it in a way I couldn't put it even more clear, in a more clear way. I would only like to thank you, Marco, and thank Joaquin for the time, for the conversation, and I hope we have more opportunities to talk without the machine and without the Antichrist trying to prevent us.
Well,
with a little less cutting through required.
Those are the strictures. Light shines, but by its very nature, it shines in and through the dark. Let this be a good sign. Amen to that.
Amen.
And from me.
and a woman too.
Which